Welcome to Gotta Run with Will. I'm Victoria Brumfield, and I'm your host for today's segment. And my guest today is the most influential person in my career, and I'm excited for him to share all of his stories and advice with you today. It's John Korff.
Hi, Vic.
Hi, John.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's so fun to be here with you. So a lot of people know you for being one of the most influential promoters in triathlon and tennis and balloon festivals, and we'll get to that, but I wanted to start with your background in running.
Well, I started running when I was a kid. I was a high school wrestler, and I started running. I was an awful wrestler, but I started running to lose weight. I figure if I drop a weight class, maybe I'll get better. And I got really.
Wait, you needed to lose weight?
Well, no, there we go.
Okay.
So I was successful at losing weight, and I continued my streak of never winning a wrestling match till I got to be a senior. At any rate, I ran. I ran to lose weight. When I was in college, I ran to sweat out hangovers like every other college kid who drank too much. And it kind of like drifted around. I was running a couple miles a day, and then I went to Harvard Business School. When you go to Harvard, I thought you were either supposed to go out for crew or you were supposed to run the marathon, because that's what the guy did in Love Story. So I thought, well, I'll do the marathon. So
your first distance run was the Boston Marathon?
Yeah, I'd never done a race before then.
And you didn't have to qualify at this point?
Didn't have to qualify.
Okay.
Didn't have to qualify. Well, I just ran it.
So your first marathon was Boston?
Yes, and I never really asked if I had to qualify. And it took me forever, 4 hours and 40 minutes or 4:20, and both my contact lenses came out, and it was about 140 degrees that day, and I knew nothing about nutrition and nothing about hydration and nothing about nothing.
I love that it took you forever, 4 hours and 20 minutes, which my first marathon took me over 5 hours. And I remember you saying to me, wow, Vic, I have so much respect for you. I can't imagine moving my feet for that long.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, now I look back on it and I did I'm sorry, Vic. And I did a 6 hour and 20-minute 50-mile race some years later.
Okay.
And I think back on my first marathon, and I'm like, that's the hardest thing I ever did.
So, when did you figure out that you loved distance running, and when did you figure out you were good at it?
When I graduated from Harvard, I did the marathon, and that's it. And then I just ran 5 miles, 8 miles, 6 miles, whatever. And the next year I ran the marathon again, and I dropped a half hour. Wow. And I did it like 3 or 4 years in a row, and I kept dropping a half an hour, 20 minutes every time until I got down to about 3 hours. And I thought, it's ridiculous to get in really good shape and then run one marathon, because I was very dogged about what I was doing. I did my long runs, I extended them for 16 weeks, I got in great shape, blah, blah, blah. So I ran Boston one year and did about 3:52 or 2:52, and I decided I'm going to wait for 3 more weeks and do another marathon. And all this training I've done is just more training for the next marathon. And I wanted to qualify with a lower time. I wanted to break 2:40, so I did 2:36, and it was great. I went to a bar in South Boston afterwards and was foolish, and it was a lot of fun. The bar
wild.
More so than the marathon.
And then when did you transition from marathons to ultras?
Well, after that marathon, I went out in Boston and I ran a 10-mile race, and I won it. And it was one of the few things that I'd won, although I'd won a few races.
Were you surprised when you won?
Yeah, I thought I was lost. I'm like, where's everybody? and now what? Like, I'm the only guy here? Would I go the wrong way? I realized I can either get faster at the marathon and maybe cut 10 or 15 minutes off my pace, but then I'd have to double my mileage, stop eating Twinkies, stop drinking gin, blah, 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 get rid of all the bad stuff and just do the good stuff. And to do what? To qualify for the Olympic trials and finish like 118th out of 122. So I thought, I'm not going to go faster, I'm going to go further.
Yep.
That seemed like the logical thing to do. So I started training. I heard about a race in England from London to Brighton, which was a double marathon. So I thought, well, that sounds like a pretty cool thing. So I did that for 3 years, and I finally got my time down to where I was one of the top 15 finishers in the race. And, I think I did 6:30, 6:37, something like that for a double. And then I thought, this is stupid. What am I going to do? Go train again for another 6 months for this race and get down to 6:15? Like, why do I want to do that? Once again, I'll go further, not faster. So I heard about this race in California called the Western States, and they said it's the hardest 100-miler in the country. And I thought, well, that's for me.
Were there a lot of 100-milers at the time? It was pretty exclusive, wasn't it?
Yeah, there weren't that many. There were very few. I mean, there were probably more than I thought, but most of them were not that well promoted, or to say the least, not that well publicized. And I thought, if I'm going to go do one, like London to Brighton was like the Boston Marathon is a historical race, and London to Brighton in that set is an historical race. And Western States is historical. It was probably the first 50-miler. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So I trained my ass off for Western States, and I made it to about 52 miles and everything collapsed.
How do you train for a 100-mile race at altitude in the mountains when you live in New York City?
Yeah.
And you can only do Harlem Hill so many times.
Well, I found out you can do it a lot more than so many times. But when I called the office at the Western States, I said, so, like, how tough are these hills? And they said, they're hills. They're okay. It's not that bad. And I said, oh, okay, so I guess I can train in the Harlem Hills. That's okay, not that bad, and I can do it 1,000,005 times. And then when I got out to, and I was only training on the pavement, I wasn't training on trails. So when I got out to California, and I'm standing at 6,000 feet under the rings from the 1960 Olympics at Squaw Valley, and I said to this woman, the same person,
Like, where do I go?
I said, where do we go? And she said, well, you follow that trail, and you just go up the mountain. I said, yeah, but there's clouds up there and snow. And she said, yeah. Right. I'm like, you told me that there were hills. These are mountains, man. You can't do this to me. That could be Mount Everest you hit up there for all I know. So the first year, by the time I got, the first 5 miles is straight up. You go from like 6,000 to 11,000 feet.
Have you ever been to that altitude before?
Oh, never.
Okay.
No. I mean, I got tired in the condo, like turning the radio on. That was a tough experience. So needless to say, my first Western States was not a stellar performance.
Okay.
I mean, everything
But you
hurt.
made it to 50 miles or more than.
Yeah, I made it, between 50 and 60 miles, but you had to cross streams about 15 times in the whole race, and every time I crossed a stream, I tried to keep my feet dry, which means every time you're stepping on a rock, you're twisting your ankle because you're sliding off the, and I didn't drink enough water, and I wasn't used to the heat, and I wasn't used to the altitude, but other than that, I was perfectly
So you're
trained.
like an ultimate city slicker.
Oh my God, it was ridiculous. And when I got to the top, they weigh you. They weigh you at every aid station, of which there's about 8 of them. And they want to make sure you don't lose too much weight because they weigh you the day before at the registration, the check-in. And my weight had dropped too much and all this kind of stuff. So they gave me a Mylar blanket, and I said, how hot is it? They said, it's 102. And I'm like, and I'm in a Mylar blanket? Like, what's up with this? They said, well, we want to warm you up, and so we see if you want to continue. I'm like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Another day.
But you had a redemption race, and actually more than one, it sounds like.
Yeah, and the one that meant the most to me, so I finally figured out exactly what you said. You got to train at altitude, you got to train on trails, you got to train on hills, and you got to train on rocky terrain, because there's a ton of loose rocks in this race. Yeah, so that's all whatever your stabilizer muscles are, I don't know. At any rate, so I did all that training. I flew out to Colorado a couple times. I ran up to the top of Aspen Mountain and back 3 times. That was a workout. That took 9 hours to do. The next day I did a 32-mile run at altitude on trails. That was a tough weekend. And I just ran on trails the whole time. And I was determined to finish this race. And at Western States, the goal is to break 24 hours and you get the belt buckle. And I had no preconceived notions that I was going to do 19 hours, because there are guys in that race that live there and they do 150 miles a week. So that guy's clearly got an advantage. But I was able to do it. I had no problems throughout the entire race. They tell you to walk up every uphill and run the flats and downhills, and if you ever don't have to go to the bathroom, you got a problem. So I remembered all that, and I did 23:09. And 12 seconds, so I was very happy. And it was the only race I've done where I cried with 2 miles to go, because I was so happy that
Oh my gosh.
that I could do it. But
And how many times have you done Western States now?
I've done it like 5 times, but I only finished it that one time.
Okay.
And I realized another time I did it, I realized I was going to break 30 hours, and I thought, that's not the deal. I already broke 24 once. I'm not just doing these to do them. I either want to go faster or I'm not going to finish.
Yeah.
So I just bagged it, and that was sort of the end of my ultra running career, because I began to think, am I running towards a goal or am I running away from something? And I think when you start thinking like that, you better look at why you're doing whatever it
So
is.
speaking of running away from something, rumor has it you were arrested for running through the Lincoln Tunnel. Is that true?
Yes, I was training for the Western States, and part of my I don't know how to train properly was I was going to run down to East Brunswick, New Jersey, and I took out an atlas map. That's pretty specific. And I thought, well, I guess all you do is run through the Lincoln Tunnel and then get take 95 south until you get to the exit. I was going to a friend's house. I had no idea where this person lived, but I wrote her address and phone number on a piece of paper and stuck it in my shoe. So you can well imagine, as I'm running through the Lincoln Tunnel, and about 4 police cars come and stop me, and I've got all of my hydration is a giant 7-Up cup with a top on it, and
Like a big gulp.
Yeah, and a straw that I was going to, stop someplace. I had no idea where someplace was and get water. So the cops say, "What are you doing?" Blah, blah, blah. And I said, "I'm running to East Brunswick." I was like, "No, you're not. You're getting with us." So they handcuffed me. They had me sit in the back of the guy's car. And I said, "I'm sitting on someone's coat." He said, "That's my coat." I said, "Yeah, but I'm kind of wet." So by the time we got to the Weehawken police station, it's like, "What'd you do to my coat?" I told him, "Oh, wet. What do you think I've been doing?" So he said, "So what were you doing?" So I explained the whole story to them. And there was a story about me because I was organizing a tennis tournament at the time, and the Newark Star-Ledger wrote a big story about me training and how I was running through the Lincoln Tunnel, and I showed it to them, and they said, "Okay, so we're not going to arrest you." "What would we arrest you for anyways?" "So we're not going to arrest you, but how are you getting down to East Brunswick?" I said I was going to run down the turnpike. They said, "You can't run on the turnpike. We will definitely arrest you then." They said, "Take 1 and 9, and just don't be bothered by the dogs because they're all in they've got big fences out."
Yeah.
So that was the scariest experience.
So you ended up running to East Brunswick?
No, I ended up running to Newark Airport. And I asked the girl in Newark, "How much further is it?" I stopped at a car rental place and said, "How much further is it to East Brunswick?" And she went, "Where?" And I thought, okay, I don't need much encouragement to stop right now. So if she didn't even know where I'm going, I must either be a long way away or she's a little short on her geography. So that was it. I ran 4 miles past Newark. I thought, this is stupid. I ran 4 miles back. I went to get the phone number and the name of my friend.
I'm sure it had disintegrated in your shoe.
Along with the $5 bill I put in there just in case. So I talked my way on a bus back to New York City, and I felt so bad that I didn't finish the run, that I went and ran 21 miles around the reservoir.
And left a soggy seat on a bus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
God.
That's so funny. So you mentioned the tennis tournament, and that was one of the things that you were so well known for at the beginning of your career was women's tennis. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
So I organized the major women's tennis tournament the week before the U.S. Open, and we had all the top
And
players.
it was one of the first women's franchises.
Yeah, the first women's only tennis tournament in the United States. And this was when Billie Jean King started the Women's Tennis Association, and they needed standalone women's tournaments because at that time there'd be a men's tournament with $50,000 in prize money, and then there'd be a women's tournament with it that had $5,000 in prize money. So they wanted the women to be
That's incredible. So you operated one of the very first, or the very first WTA standalone women's tennis tournament in the United States.
Because it was a standalone women's tournament, it was a week before the Open, everybody played. I mean, everybody in the top 10. I mean, I got a little spoiled. And because it was the week before the U.S. Open, as the years went on, I would always have 7 of the top 10, 8 of the top 10, and it was a terrific event, and we got great crowds. We did some very creative things that nobody else did, and it went on for 21 years.
So you were really well known for doing all these creative things that nobody else would do in what was a pretty stuffy traditional sport.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about those fun things that you did?
I would say all the things we did were directed specifically at the consumer, so they would have a good time. And I figured if the customer had a good time, the ticket holder, then the players would have a better time. So and the players knew what we were doing. So if they didn't like that kind of a tennis tournament, they didn't have to come to it. And we were the only one. They liked it and they all wanted to come to it. But we told our spectators that you can walk around during play, you can talk during play, you don't have to sit still. You paid a lot of money for a ticket. We're not going to say no to you all the time. We're going to say yes to you if that's what you want. We also realized after a period of time, a women's tennis tournament is 7 days, and nobody likes to play Monday or Tuesday night, Monday specifically. None of the top players, it's like my attitude was, this is like a Broadway opening, and if you don't have a sold out Monday night, then, like, what are you? So what we decided to do was to have a band play on Monday night and a band play on Saturday night. We got the Beach Boys on Saturday, and we had Chicago play on Monday. And one end of the stadium we turned into a concert stage and built up the other three sides of the stadium. And it was magical. It was just terrific, and everybody really liked it, and the players loved it. We took the girls that were in the finals, and the Beach Boys played Saturday night, and while the drummer for the Beach Boys played Wipeout, we had the players hit beach balls in the crowd.
It's so fun.
Yeah, it was a blast. It was a lot of fun.
Is it fun for you now to see a lot of those same tactics and experiences in tennis in general?
Well, it took about 30 years, but the U.S. Open's finally caught up with the things we did. And
30 years later.
30 years later, they finally figured out it's not a tennis tournament, it's an event. And I give the USTA a lot of credit because they continue to grow every year. Not a lot of, I don't think there's any other tournament that did the things that we did. But, but professional tennis has changed, and it used to be that well over half the women's tournaments were in the United States, and now there's only about 3 of them.
Yeah.
So that was my career in tennis, and then later I got on the board of directors of the United States Tennis Association. I did that for 6 years, so that was enjoyable. I was able to give back a little bit, but the USTA owns the U.S. Open, so they don't really have...
It's not a bad thing to own.
Not a bad thing to own, exactly.
I remember what you just said reminded me of 2 things that you always used to say that I loved was you need an event to look like its 10th year in its first year, and it takes 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yes.
And do you feel like that translated too when you transitioned from tennis to triathlon?
Yes, because we always sold out. And we sold out because we determined what the sellout number was.
In triathlon.
In triathlon.
Yeah, so the New York City Triathlon, though, started as a part of New York's Olympic bid.
Yes.
And it was just going to be a one and done, maybe 2 years?
One and done. Yeah,
Okay.
2 years because they had a 2-year contract with USA Triathlon, the national governing board, and the purpose of that was so that we in New York would host the U.S. Pro Championships, and it was very popular initially, and this is just when triathlon was starting its boom.
Well,
in
because
like
you were
2000.
producing events beyond just triathlon, right? You were doing it for archery and fencing and wrestling and all these other events, but the general public couldn't participate in those.
And this was the one and only event the general public could participate in. And the first year, I think that race had about 1,800 people, and the second year it had about 2,400 people. Still the pros leading the way. And then, as you know, it got to the point where there was like 6,000 people, and it was selling out in 5 minutes, and then we had to go to a lottery.
But it was really your vision to say to New York's Olympic bid, we can't let this go away. Right? It was this great event. We only had it contracted for 2 years, but you then took it and built it really into what it became.
Yeah, and we were very proud of that, and you were very much a part of that. And when the 2 years was up, I went to Dan Doctoroff and Jay Kriegel, who were the 2 guys, behind the bid, and I said, we'd like to keep this triathlon. And they said, well, we'd like to offer it first to New York Roadrunners, and if they don't want it, then you guys can have it. You can have it. And I said, well, the problem is that the International Triathlon Union, who you really need their support if you're bidding for the Olympics, they don't like to be number 2 in somebody's portfolio. And if you give it or sell it to Roadrunners, you will forever be number 2. You're not the marathon. And that's what they want. Whereas with me, you are the marathon. So we were lucky. They gave it to us. We built it up and eventually sold it off to Lifetime Fitness when it looked like it was going to be on some shaky terms in the next 5 or 10 years.
So a lot of people, including Will Sanchez, know you for being the guy who would pick up the phone and call you at 12:01 a.m. when they didn't get into the race and they were desperate for an entry. And you would call not only them, but every participant in the race. And you talk a little bit about why you took that personal approach and how you think that impacted the success of the event.
My attitude was we only have 6,000 customers. So direct customers. So we might as well make every one of these people feel that they're the most special. And when you have a business and you sell out of one of your 2 primary sources of inventory on the day you open, You got to have something to do. So, you know, there's sponsorship revenue, and then there's entry revenue. So you can always work on sponsorship revenue. So what I did was I emailed everybody who entered the race a personal email, and I made sure it was personal because I included 1 or 2 sentences from something from their application. And I would get people who email me back, and I would just get in these email conversations. There's still a guy who entered the race the first year from Italy that emails me every year. So that was great. And then we started calling everybody as the race got closer. And the real reason we were calling them was to find out if anybody had any interesting stories for the media.
Yeah.
And but we told them, you know, we're calling to see if you have any questions. And then most people were just shocked that somebody from a race would call and say, do you have any questions about the race? Your entry's fine. Are you looking forward to it? But we got a lot of great stories out of it. And that's how we got a lot of our coverage.
So it's interesting. So you have a history in tennis and triathlon, and then also balloon festivals. Is there a common thread between these 3 very different things?
Well, what I like to do, I realized when I went to college, is I like to organize big things. And my attitude was that it's harder to organize something small than it is to organize something big.
Yeah.
So if you organize something big, the only challenge is you've probably never done it, but you haven't done the small thing either. So you probably haven't done it, and financially you either have to have a bunch of money or it better work. So we were lucky that all these things worked. And
do you think the Beach Boys was part of it? You had the Beach Boys a lot at the balloon festival, the kind of the magic sauce.
Yeah, we had the Beach Boys for about 5 or 6 years on Saturday night at the at the tennis tournament.
Yeah.
And then we later had them play at the balloon festival, and that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Beach Boys were really terrific. Perfect suburban family entertainment. And a lot of my friends in tennis said, yeah, but you lose a ticket selling session. And I said, but you don't get it. I'm selling out the Beach Boys. So if I pay the Beach Boys $85,000, and what tennis player could I buy for $85,000 and sell $150,000 worth of tickets?
Yeah.
Like Arantxa Sanchez? Nobody. So this is a much better move.
What do you think the challenges of all these events that you've produced that are so weather dependent, especially those that have pro athletes?
It's just something more to worry about. I had rain insurance one year at the tennis tournament, and I collected on it. I was very happy that I did.
It worked?
It
Wow.
always works. It just doesn't always rain. So it was good. That was good.
Yeah. Do you have any favorite stories from the triathlon?
Oh my goodness. I remember the year that we had jellyfish, and people asked us, well, why didn't you announce you had jellyfish the day before? It's like, how are we supposed to know the day before we have jellyfish when there's no jellyfish
Yeah, we
there?
didn't get the Evite. We didn't know they were coming.
Yeah, they were just coming down to have some fun. But I think that people had a story to tell when they got stung by jellyfish.
Do you remember the year of the dead fish?
I remember lots of I remember a lot of things floating in the Hudson. You wouldn't, because you've seen it, but we were quite surprised at some of the things that floated up in the Hudson River.
Low bacteria count, but high debris count.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny. That one year with the fish, it was like out of nowhere that like thousands of fish just like died and floated to the top.
Yeah.
People were like swimming through fish.
Well, once we got to know the police well, as you remember, there was always a cop on the start barge, and that was the guy that would ultimately say, you can start the race.
Yeah.
So our race director, nobody else could say, just this one cop, you can start the race. And I remember, I don't know if you were there, but a couple of times I got there really super duper early in the morning and went with the police when they went up and down the course to make sure that there was nothing in the water that didn't belong there. Didn't belong in the water. So, like a guy. And I remember saying to the cop, what do you mean? What do you mean a guy? He said, a guy that doesn't belong there. You've seen The Sopranos.
Yeah, the only race where 1,000 go in and 1,001 come out. Yeah.
One way or another. So, and then of course that led into getting the Ironman, which was sort of.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the Ironman. A lot of people don't know that you were the one who actually made that happen, and it was a lot of years in the making.
Well, we spent a long time trying to get it, and the Ironman didn't franchise out any of their races in North America at that point.
At the full distance. They only did it the shorter distances, right?
And I thought that an Ironman in New York City, as challenging as it would be phenomenal for Ironman. And obviously New York is a great place to do it because it's the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And I felt that it's a great place to do it because there's such demand for triathlon, if for no other reason than there's so many people that live within an hour drive at the start of the race. So we didn't have a lot of success in getting anybody's attention at Ironman and them wanting to do it. It's a pain in the ass until Ironman was bought by a venture capital firm. And one of the venture capital guys was a triathlete who'd done the New York City Triathlon a couple times. And he thought it'd be a fabulous idea to do it in New York City. So as the new owner of the race, we talked about it a few times, and he told his staff at Ironman that they should look into it and find a way to make it happen. And when I got on the phone with the guys from Ironman who suddenly decided to pay attention, they said, "So can we finish in Times Square?" And I said, "No, absolutely not."
This is 1010 Wins.
Good morning. It's 75 degrees at 6:40 on this Saturday, August 11th. Today's Ironman competition will go on as planned, including the swimming portion, despite a recent release of sewage into the Hudson.
There was a little sewage leak in the Hudson, so hopefully that won't be an issue.
If you can keep your mouth closed and not let the water get in your mouth, it should be okay.
We did the race. There were logistical challenges to it. I think it was more challenging for Ironman than they were used to because they had a business model that didn't rely on all the chaos that comes with permitting in New York and in New Jersey and in 4 counties and all that. So
Well, and the permitting process was years in the making because, to your point, it was across New Jersey and New York and the Port Authority and all of these logistical permitting challenges that nobody had ever tried
and every
before.
town we went through in New Jersey, we had to get a permit, which those guys were pretty stoked because this is a big deal going through their town. We had to get a permit from the Palisades Parkway, which they'd never closed the Parkway. That wasn't a cheap close. And it was a difficult spectator race because where do you go? Do you go to New Jersey or do you go to New York City? A large part of the Ironman is the big buildup at the finish line.
Yeah.
So we probably had more people at the finish than most other Ironmans. It's just we couldn't make any noise after 10 o'clock at night, and that's the guts of an Ironman other than the finish for the leaders are those people that come in between 11 and 12 at night in the last hour.
That iconic finish.
Yeah, and we couldn't deliver the noise or the music or the PA announcer after that time. So at any rate, Ironman decided it was a one and done, paid us our money, and they went somewhere else.
Yeah.
Probably made a whole bunch more money.
It was an incredible event. When you think about Ironman, you think about that mass start, the swim on the beach, and we had to build an entire ferry infrastructure in New Jersey.
Yeah, which is unheard of in Ironman circles. The budget we had was probably bigger than any budget they've ever had in their race, maybe other than the one in Hawaii.
Times 4, yeah.
Yeah. So it was very challenging. For all I know, they got the word on high that they had to hit certain numbers, and if they couldn't hit numbers on races, then they should get rid of the races. That could have been the case in New York. But I felt over the long term, they were in such small cities that the participant didn't mind because the participant just wanted to be an Ironman or do an Ironman. But their sponsor base was pretty endemic to the industry. They didn't go outside of the industry.
One of my favorite stories was we went to do the Malibu Triathlon, and I remember you doing it as a relay, and you did the bike and the run, and I remember you rented a beach cruiser with a Blazing Saddles saddlebag up front. I think you put some like Yoo-hoo
chocolate soda.
Maybe some powdered donuts in there.
Yeah.
And I remember you passing people on their $10,000 triathlon bikes and deep dish aero wheels on that little bike on the PCH highway.
Yeah, I mean, I had I was wearing khaki shorts, my sneakers, and a shirt. We were just hanging out, and you guys were doing the race. One of our colleagues was there, and she said she could only do the swim, and I said, well, I'll do the rest if I can find a bike at
and
6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, and all the stuff. So lo and behold, there was a bike store, and that's where we rented the beach cruiser. And I was climbing stairs a lot at the time, and my legs were a lot stronger than I thought. And I was just zipping through the bike course on this,
so funny.
on this 50-pound bike. It was ridiculous.
Well, and that's something actually to circle back to when we were talking about running. You were actually told by a doctor that you shouldn't run anymore at one point.
I had neck surgery and a fusion because of some disc issues, and the guy said you shouldn't pound anymore.
Yeah.
So I said, how bad is this? And the guy said, well, you could be paralyzed for life. So I took him at
Yeah,
I thought
that's
that
pretty
that
serious.
seemed like that seemed
Yeah.
like a valid reason.
So you transitioned to stairs.
So I remember one day I was after I heard this, I had had a few cocktails at night, and my elevator didn't work in my building. So I walked up 6 flights of stairs to my apartment, and I was really winded. And I thought, whoa, I'm supposed to be in good shape. What's up with this? So I put down the New York Times and whatever I gotten, and I went back down and walked up and down the stairs a couple more times, and I was sweating like crazy. And I thought, this must be pretty good, good exercise. So I went and found some tall buildings, what I thought was tall at the time, and climb up 15 flights of stairs and take the elevator down and climb up again, take the elevator down, find a 30-story building you can get into. And at that point, I was way into it because I couldn't run.
And you did the Empire State Building run-up.
Yes.
So you'd go from 24-hour challenges to 11-minute challenges.
11-minute challenges, yeah.
Yeah, win your age group.
Won my age group. It was very difficult. It was the hardest 12 minutes and 13 seconds of my life, without a doubt. But it's a very efficient exercise. It's too tough for most people to do. I'm not saying I'm this big stud, but I didn't mind it because if you live in a tall apartment building, all you have to do is put on shorts and sneakers and a t-shirt and go to your exit, and there's your gym.
That's such a New York City sport.
Yeah, well, I remember, actually, the year that I won my age group, I had, for some oddball reason, a panic attack. And not knowing what it is, I went to see a doctor, and I'm like, I'm really scared I'm having a heart attack. So he checked me out, and he said, no, I think you had a panic attack. I said, okay, so what do I do? Because this has happened before. And he said, recently, very recently at the time, I saw him, and he said, well, you can do one of two things. You can either take these pills, but they may make you tired. And I said, well, I go to work, so what am I going to do, fall asleep? He said, or you can do extreme cardiovascular activity and burn it out. So I said, okay. So that's when I started climbing stairs, and then I went back to see him after the race, and he was on the 26th floor, and he said, my elevator's not working, we can schedule another time. I said, don't worry about it. I'll be there in 2.5 minutes. And I said, so I won my age group. I took your advice.
That's so funny. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's actually good advice to end on, is that on these cold 10-degree New York City day, we can all agree the weather is always perfect
in a
stairwell.
It's always 72 in the stairs, baby.
Well, thank you so much, John, for coming today and for talking with us. Thank you to the Manhattan Neighborhood Network and to Will Sanchez for hosting us.
You're right, we could talk forever.
I know.
Yeah. Thanks, Victoria. That was a lot of fun. I'm sure we could talk forever about our triathlon stories, our tennis stories, and we didn't even get into balloon stories, but they're there as well. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. It's time. Gotta run.